Send them home. So then 10,000 remain. And then he says, that's still too many, Gideon. So I need you to narrow it down to 300 or narrow it down further. And then he gives them this test about drinking water. And that's what we're going to talk about for a second when we get there. And out of the drinking water test, 300 are chosen. And those are Gideon's warriors to go into battle with him. After that, Gideon is still scared about going into battle, which is understandable, and also kind of Gideon's MO up until this point. He's just kind of afraid of whatever's going on. And so God gives him a dream. Or no, he doesn't. Let me back up. God gives someone else a dream. And God says, if you read it, I found this to be interesting. God says, if you are still afraid of the battle, go down into the Midianite camp and listen to what the soldier says who's in the camp, which is kind of interesting. There's kind of, I didn't see much of this in my notes, but there are two things that kind of went through my head there, right? First, how would Gideon just walk up to the camp? And then second, how would they not notice him? I guess those two things are related. So there's kind of two things that could have happened. He could have snuck up, right? It was the nighttime, so you can sneak up. If this is a massive army and one Israelite comes up to the camp, it's not like the whole camp is going to be like, hey, there's our bad guy, let's go get him. Right? Second, in this day and age when there are no photos and no portraits and no pictures, there's really no, if Gideon had dressed in what we might call plain clothes, if he had dressed kind of like a normal person, then it would have been hard for especially somebody from a different nation to identify this one as like, oh, this is the leader of Israel. Right? So it could be very well that Gideon kind of just walked up and in kind of normal clothes, and he wouldn't have been recognized. We see this a couple spots, kind of this disguise. We see this in a couple spots in the Old Testament as well, where like Saul tries to dress up like a normal person and tries to like go undetected, but also Saul is like 6'4" and everybody else is 5'5", so they're like, who are you? And then there's another one, another king switches armor. Yeah. The two kings switch armor and nobody can really tell, right? Nowadays, if like Donald Trump and King Charles III tried to like switch clothes, we would all be like, what are you doing? Because we've all seen pictures of all of them and we know what they look like. But if we had never seen a picture or an image of King Charles or Donald Trump and they switched clothes, we both would be like, maybe, like, okay, sure. So anyway, that's kind of what's going on there. So God tells him to go down into the camp. And then if you notice when you're reading, he says, and if you're afraid, take your servant with you and go. And then it says, and Gideon took his servant with him, right? Which is, he's still afraid. So here's the dream. The dream is about a barley loaf that comes down into the camp and destroys the camp. And the interpreter of the dream says, well, that's got to be Gideon. Gideon then, like in that moment, says, okay, it's time to go. He goes back, grabs his 300 guys, and for the battle, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. For the battle, he says, take your trumpet and take your pot that has a lamp in it. So the trumpet you got to hold in one hand, and the pot with the lamp in it you got to hold in the other hand. And so what don't you have space in your hands for?
A weapon.
A weapon. They go into the battle unarmed. All right. And that's going to be when we come back in here and talk about what it means to select the 300 men. I want us to remember that these guys are not holding weapons. All right. They have the horn and they have the pot. So they blow the trumpet and they smash the pots on the ground and they say for the Lord and for Gideon. And then Midian just rises up in confusion and fights themselves. Right.
At night.
That night. Yep. At night. So that all happens in the dark. We're not going to spend, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the battle itself. That's just kind of in my mind, it's kind of a description of what happened. But if you have questions about the battle, we can go through it. So then he wins the great victory. The army of Midian is crushed. They all flee in different directions, and Gideon starts his pursuit. Judges 8 is not a great Gideon chapter. He kind of turns out to not be that great of a guy after that verse 3. So he's starting to chase the Midianites. He goes to an Israelite town and says, hey, we're exhausted. Give us some food so we can continue chasing the Midianites. They're like, no, thank you. And then he says, well, if I go catch them and I come back, then we're not going to be happy together. And then he goes to the next Israelite town and it's the same thing. Right, hey, can I have some food while I chase Midian? And they say no. And he says, well, when I come back, I'm not going to be very happy with you. And they head up. In the text, it actually gives you where they go. The Midianites actually fled all the way up into modern day Turkey, like 85 miles away. Gideon and the 300 pursued them that far and captured them there. They come back. That he does worse to the towns than what he promised as he left. Right? So he said that he was going to do bad things to the towns that didn't help him. He goes and captures the Midianite kings. He comes back and he does worse than what he promised to the towns, which is very sad. That's not good. And then after all of that, he takes his vengeance on the Midianite kings too. We'll step into that. That's another part I want to talk about. And then he takes all of the gold. So I should have thrown one in here. This is going to be important. This is what we're going to talk about today too. He refuses the kingship. Kinda. Like in name, he refuses the kingship. And then like everything after that is what a king does. So it's just, okay, Gideon, sure. Thank you. A little bit like how, if you know your British history, Oliver Cromwell overthrew the British crown. And then they said, hey, why don't we make Oliver Cromwell the king? And Oliver Cromwell was like, no, I don't want to be king. I just want to be Lord Protector. And also this title's hereditary, so it's going to my son. And also we're starting a dynasty. But I'm not king, right? There's your British history for you. So he refuses to be king, but then he takes the gold from the spoil and creates an ephod. We'll talk about what that is. He then has a bunch of children. We'll talk about what that means. And then he ends up passing away. So that is kind of the overall narrative of Judges 7 and 8. We're not going to read every single bit of it, but that's where we're going. So, if you guys read, did you have any questions or comments or noticings in the text? Karen?
Yeah, in verse 18.
In which chapter?
I'm sorry, verse 15 of 7.
Okay.
As soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped. And he returned to the camp and said, arise, for the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand. Mm-hmm. Isn't that different than what he did earlier? He was thinking it was all about him.
A little bit, yeah. Right. And it's actually interesting, right? There's within chapter 7, God is acting graciously and mightily for Israel. And then I think it's chapter 7, verse 22. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. That is the last time that God acts in either of these chapters. And then after that, the rest of it is Gideon's personal actions for his own motivations. So we're going to talk a little bit about Gideon's motivations too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic just looking at the board because God is with Gideon. They don't even have a weapon, and God is with them, and then they defeat Midian. Mm-hmm. But yet, in his own humanness, he on his way home, he commits that evil to the towns that didn't help him. Yeah.
This is the first moment in Judges where we see the judge act in revenge. Mm-hmm. It will not be the last. Samson is very good at revenge, and Jephthah is very good at revenge. And also, kind of to tag onto that too, Mary, like Gideon I should say God through Gideon and the 300 who don't have weapons defeat the entire army of Midian. And then the first thing that Israel says to Gideon is, wow, you should be king because you're such a great commander. It's like, no, right? Like a good commander doesn't take 300 unarmed men into battle, right? This is not, it's not what's happening at all, but I digress, right? Okay, so Robert, go ahead.
I'm also waiting, like this happened with David and Bathsheba. in that, but the thing David had done did not please the Lord. But there's
yeah.
no discouraging word in the narrative here.
Right. Yeah, that'll be I'm trying to think. I don't know that we're going to find one in the judges cycles. I don't know if we're going to get a moment where
Yeah, so you don't get any kind of evaluative statement from God or from anybody.
right. Yeah, you only get statements from God about that when the people of Israel have done evil and then are oppressed, right? I think at the beginning in chapter 6, right? That was where we started. God through a prophet reminds Israel that they have done wrong, and that they're crying out. And God doesn't even say like, "Oh, I'll send you a savior." He just kind of condemns their action, right? So, and I think so. I guess maybe put these two things together, and I think the flow of Judges is very interesting in that I think what we are highlighting in this study particularly is the failures of the judges themselves. But also, I think we can't ignore that at the end of every judges cycle, or most judges cycles, there is kind of this holding up or this praise of what the judge has done. Even later, right? Hebrews 11 has 4 judges, like labels 4 judges in it. It's Samson, Barak, Gideon, and is it Deborah? I don't remember the other. Jephthah. Jephthah's in there for sure. So the Bible holds up the actions of these judges, and yet what we see is their fears and their failures in the midst of it. And so I think if we're gonna take a step back out of the text for a second and talk about us in this room and then everybody who's going to eventually be watching online, I think what Pastor Steve and I, as your Bible study leaders, have noticed and are really kind of honing in on, whether this is good or bad, is in our minds, there has been a like Sunday school depiction of the judges, right? That the people of Israel were kind of doing wrong and they were down on their luck and there were bad people. And God brought in these really cool, good people to come and save them from whatever it was that was going on. And I think as we are studying and reading our notes and going through our text, I think what Pastor Steve and I are noticing is we don't need to make the judges perfect, right? And so I think we're spending perhaps too much time pointing out their failures and their shortcomings and what they're going after. And I say that, and then we're just going to do that again with Gideon for another 45 minutes. But I think that the grand point that we are making by highlighting all of these failures and all of these things happening in the Judges is, first off, we don't need our biblical heroes to be Sunday school perfect. Right? Maybe when we're 6, we need our biblical heroes to be Sunday school perfect. Maybe. But right now, as we're reading this, I think I want to give you guys permission and capability to look at the sins that even these great giants of the faith have done and say, you know what, that's not okay. Right? That wasn't okay what they did. And yet, then here comes the bigger point that's being made for the church. And yet, God's salvation is still completed through these people who continue to fail again and again and again, and who get worse and worse and worse. The point being that salvation is yours, whether you get better according to the law or get worse according to the law. That your salvation comes from outside of you being a better or worse person according to the standards of the world or even the standards of God's law, but is given purely from where God promises you that salvation is yours. Right? That's the radical thing of the gospel. So when we look, go ahead, Carl.
Well, and yet Israel had 40 years of rest.
Right. Yeah.
So something went right.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and Sue?
Well, I was going to say too, when Judges start, it says, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And I think that, and we were just talking about that last night, because that was true of the judges too. When Gideon did that ephod, it was like, well, I guess he thought it was an okay thing, and it gets back to that.
Yeah, we'll peek at that too, because I think that's an interesting little bit of motivation there for Gideon as well. So as we're doing the Judges, we're kind of highlighting the not so great things that they did, so that at least in our heads, the image of kind of this balance between these people are complete saints based on the promise of God and complete sinners based on their own capacity. Right. And that's what we can see even all the way back in Judges. And so if this is what's true for you, it's what's always been true, right? This isn't something new just because Jesus came, right? That this kind of saint and sinner thought through, at least Martin Luther highlighted, can be seen in human nature since the beginning of time. So that's kind of what we're getting, or at least the beginning of humanity. So anything else?
Would it be a purpose? Sorry, I spent all my time reading comic books, but what do the Judges remind me of is like the Justice League,
Hmm.
which is DC, by the way, if you're not
Right.
a Marvel person. But, you know, they were raised up to rescue,
Mhm.
warts and all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are deeply flawed individuals, and that actually should bring us a lot of comfort. That, and again, one of the thing, not the main thing, but one of the things is, right, if God can bring about salvation through these
Imperfect.
imperfect, warts and all, sometimes horrible sinners, right, then salvation can be brought to us too. So let's hop in. We'll start with, I wanted to spend a little time, we're gonna spend a little time talking about how Gideon and God select the 300 that they select. The end of the lesson of this, or the end of the little clip of this, I'm gonna say it didn't matter. Nothing matters. There's no reason to it, but we're gonna spend a lot of time trying to figure this out. So just so you know what's coming at the end. So we start with 32,000. And then we have to subtract 22,000 who were afraid. They go home to their houses. So then we have 10,000 left. And then they're given a task. Drink some water. And there's a couple things in here, so I'll read this. And just the way that the water is being drunk has been such confusion in my mind, right? And again, at the end, the lesson's going to be, it doesn't matter. We don't need to know exactly how this water was drunk, but it's the image of it what confuses me. So chapter 7, verse 4. The Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And anyone of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, shall go with you. And anyone of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps the water with his tongue, whatever this means, like a dog laps, you shall set by himself. Likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink. Okay, so we have the lappers like a dog, and the kneelers like a kneeler. All right, and so there's something. Okay, I don't know what that means, right? I can kind of have an image in my mind, but we're gonna have to get to it because another detail is given about the lappers that makes my first thought perhaps not right. All right, so we're in verse 6. And the number of those who lapped, and then it says this, putting their hands to their mouths. Okay, so this is not how I would think a dog would lap water. So there's another confusing thing for me. What does that mean? All right. Putting their hands to their mouths with 300, but the rest of the people knelt to drink. All right, so they're nice.
Didn't they use their hands to drink?
Yeah. So my best guess, as we're looking at this, is that the lappers got on one knee, scooped up water with their hand, and then and so this was the lapping motion. Maybe. Again, does it matter? No. right? But we have the image of them getting down on, at least they have to like have their hand involved. And so there's something about them bringing water to their mouth. All right. That this is kind of the motion that's being done by these lappers. The kneelers then, and if I had to pick, I think I would probably be a kneeler depending on the water. The kneelers then would be the ones who get down, as I would say, on all fours and then like actually put their
Put your
face in and suck up the water. Right now, then, if you asked me which one of these would I, Pastor Colby, call lapper and which one would I call a kneeler, I would probably say that the person who's drinking like a dog is the one who's down with his face in the water. But that's not, I didn't get to write it. So that's not how it's going. So this is my best guess. All right. Is that these guys who are lapping with their tongues are down on one knee and are scooping the water up with their hand or two hands, whichever it is. And are drinking that way. And then the rest of them are like down on all fours and have their face in the water or at least close to it. All right. That's as best as I can figure out.
I think it's what they're doing is it's the lapping.
Right.
So like you could, if I was on four, I could grab it and drink. Right.
Yeah.
That's what I think everyone in this room would do.
Okay.
So to separate the 300, I could take that same water, but now I'm lapping it out of my hand.
Right.
It's who's going to,
Feeling like
and
you're only
who's-
on two now.
and who's going to do that, right? So
Right.
300 people
Yeah.
out of 10,000 are going to be.
So then,
So I think that's the key is the
right. So then this leads us into kind of a double-sided question that if you were kind of listening to me before, at the end doesn't really matter. Because at the end, these 300, what are they not holding in battle?
Weapons.
They're not holding a weapon. Okay. So a lot of people, when they come to this section, will try to ask, well, were the 300 better soldiers? Were the 300 worse soldiers? Were they really smart? Were they just like so stupid? Right? Because again, like who's gonna like to drink your water?
How much you get?
Right? Like so in whichever way we're going with this. So, and I'll give you a couple. Right? There are some writings from some like Roman era or like just after the Roman era Christian generals who would read this and who would say like, oh, these guys were the better soldiers because when they scooped up the water, they still had their spear in their hand and were like lapping and like looking around. But the kneelers put all their weapons down and put their face down and weren't alert anymore. So Gideon was like, oh, these 300 are better. Right. And then like on our end, right, we're like, well, if you're going to sit there and like tongue the water off your hand, then you're obviously an idiot. So you're worse. Right. So like there's all of this conjecture about which way to go with this. Who are they smart? Are they dumb? Are they good soldiers? Are they bad soldiers? All of that is moot if at the end and during the battle, they're not holding weapons. Right. It doesn't matter if you're a good or a bad soldier in the middle of a battle if you don't have a sword. Right. So the point being, and I think this is a pretty obvious point for us, right? The point being, God is saying the people are too many. We are going to make sure that everyone knows that Midian was defeated by God's hand, not Gideon's hand. Right. So the selection, as we're kind of moving through this, the selection ultimately, at least I think the best way to read this is to be okay with the selection being completely arbitrary. Right? That God could have said something like, well, look at everybody's face. And if they have a mole on their left cheek, then they're going to go and fight the battle with you. Right? And only 300 men had moles on their left cheek. Right? Like the mole on the left cheek has nothing to do with how well they fight or whatever. Right? That could have been it. Right? It could have been anything. The point being, God is selecting in a specific way to show that he is the one who's about to win the victory. All right. So he picks the 300 who are doing whatever it is that they're doing, not because they're being special and also not because they're being dumb, but because he is picking these to show his victory is upcoming. Specifically, in verse 8, the people took the provisions in their hands and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel and every man to his tent. Because they're going to come back later. Israel is not nomadic at this point. They are living in their cities and their towns in the hill country. And so when you, as all of Israel and every man are in a tent, you are in a tent for a war camp, or however you want a military camp, right? He's not sending these 9,700 home like he sent the 22,000 home. He's sending them in reserve. And they eventually come up, once the battle is done and they start chasing, then that's those are the moments where that 9,700 is then called up to come and chase Midian and pursue them and make sure that they're routed. Right. So the 300 fight the actual battle, and then the reserves come in and
Mop up.
and do some mop up. Yeah. So that's what that all is. That's the kneelers and the lappers, and that's the victory. Again, I didn't have a lot to tell you about the actual battle itself. At least as far as Bible study goes, I find the battles to be just kind of purely descriptive, and you're like, yep, that happened. Right? This is that it went just like God said it would. So then we can move on. Chapter 8 then is where it gets a little interesting. Gideon starts a revenge tour. If only, I put that in there, if only chapter 7 could have ended Gideon's narrative, and yet here we are, it does not. So Gideon Gideon is chasing Zeba and Zalmunna. And he's chasing them for a reason. He's not chasing them like they're chasing Sisera. Or like Barak was chasing Sisera.
And God is not telling Gideon to chase this time.
So he's chasing Zeba and Zalmunna, who are called the kings of Midian. And I probably should have confirmed this off the top of my head. Midian is a cousin of Israel. I think they're descended from Esau. So these are the people that God is telling Israel to be mostly nice to, at least nicer than some other nations because they're still related. So Gideon's chasing them down, and they cross the Jordan and they flee north. It actually says that they go, in verse 10, they go to Karkor, which is in modern day Turkey. So like 80 plus miles from the battlefield. If you are chasing a routing army, at least in this day and age, you're not chasing them 80 miles down the road that they're running from. So Gideon is like looking for them. He's going way out of his way, right? Days and days away from Israel just to find them. So he goes to Succoth and Penuel. So, man, what would a Pastor Colby Old Testament Bible study be without a map? There's Israel. 3 lines. The battle took place probably up here somewhere. Ish. They flee. It says that they have to go across some fords in the Jordan. Look. No, I'm not seeing it. Succoth is probably here. And then there's a valley. So there's some mountains here and some mountains here. And then it kind of flattens out this way, and they start fleeing north. And then Penuel is like right here. I spelled that wrong, but I don't care. These are very likely in the land of Gad. So these are probably Gadites who live here. And so Gideon is coming to this town, and he says, "Hey, help me, please." And they say no. And he says, "Well, when I return after I have found my quarry, then I am going to flail your flesh with the thorns in the wilderness and the briars," which is interesting. First off, it's an interesting translation because the way that he puts it is a little funny, because the word that's being used in there is not like flail, because the word flail in English is like to hit somebody, but like right, or it is. It's like to hit. I was thinking of flay. So the flail is to like hit somebody with a whip, but the Hebrew word is to like push like a plow over them, like a threshing sledge over them. So that's not fun either, right? I don't like any of that. So like the image is like Gideon is gonna lay them down on a bunch of thorns and then take like a threshing sledge and like run them over with it. So not great. Again, not a good thing to say to your cousins either, right? I don't recommend going off to your cousins and telling them that you're gonna run them over with farming equipment. And then he goes to Penuel and they say no thank you, and he says, I'm going to break down your tower when I come back. He goes up all the way up to Turkey, finds the two kings, brings them back, and he does worse to them than he promised. Right? He comes back and he grabs a youth.
Son.
No, that's for Ziba and Zalmunna. He has like in verse 15, he comes to the men of Succoth and said, behold Ziba and Zalmunna, about who you taunted me, saying, I was saying about Penuel. Why should we give you bread? Because you're exhausted. And he took the elders of the city, so not just the ones who said no, but all of the elders of the city, and took thorns of the wilderness and briars and taught the men of Succoth a lesson. Right? It doesn't get too specific, but we know what that means. And then he goes to the tower of Penuel and he kills the men of the city too. So not only does he break down the tower, but he decides all the men in that city have to die. So not doing great. Not a good thing to do. God didn't tell him to do this. Their motivations the motivations of these towns are probably not great, right? They probably should have offered Gideon some support. However, I don't know that the narrative is necessarily telling us like, oh yeah, haha, look at them getting their comeuppance. I think this is more about like, geez, Gideon, what are you doing, man? So then Ziba and Zalmunna, this is the moment where we see that this is completely about revenge. He gets them, he brings them back, and then in verse 18, he asks them a really vague question about something that we have not seen in the narrative. Right? This is something that's like completely separate. Where are the men whom you killed at Tabor? What? And there's no battle or anything at Tabor. There's no mention of the Midianites coming and like killing specific people at the specific location. This is a new bit of information for us. Right? This is something that has happened in Gideon's past that he has been holding on to for a long time. And they answered, as you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the son of a king. So that's kind of interesting. The two kings look at Gideon and they say, you look just like those guys that we totally remember killing at Tabor. Right? And we don't, there's a little detail in there about, whatever. So, in the ancient world, the way that, or they kind of, how do I put this? The station that you were born into, they assumed was like inherent within you, if that makes sense. So if you were born the son of a king, then they thought that no matter what happened to you, you were always going to be a king no matter what. If you were born a peasant, then you were always going to be a peasant. So there's this really famous story. We're going to step off to the side and I'm going to do a little story here for a second. So apologies if this is boring, but there's a really famous story about King Cyrus of Persia, the founder of the Persian dynasty or the Persian Empire. And the story of King Cyrus and his upbringing kind of goes like this. I'm not going to do a good job because I'm paraphrasing, but if you want to look it up, you can for, just for fun. That King Cyrus was the secret child of the king of like a local king that Babylon had conquered. And Babylon didn't want this king to have any children. So the king that had been conquered had to like hide Cyrus he had to go be adopted by a shepherd. And then there's a moment where the shepherd who's raising Cyrus sends him to, I think like a military camp or school or something. And Cyrus, who is assumed to be a shepherd boy, is there interacting with a bunch of like sons of nobility and commanders of the Babylonian army. And Cyrus, like, immediately, without hesitation, starts like ordering them around, and they start following his orders. Like, this is kind of the story of Cyrus's childhood. And so then the people in charge, the adults, they don't say like, "Oh, dumb shepherd boy, stop doing that." They say, "Who's your dad?" That's the first thing they ask him, right? Not like, "How dare you try to order around these nobles?" They assume that Cyrus has some blood or some lineage within him that would give him the inherent ability to order the nobles around. So that like Cyrus's paternity is discovered because he orders around the nobles. All right. So here I'm telling you all of that, right? Because that's kind of how the mind of the ancient Near Eastern like military commanders worked. So when Zeba and Zalmunna tell Gideon that all of them looked like you and all of them looked like a king, right? Something about they're assuming something about Gideon's bloodline, right? They're assuming that Gideon has something inherent in him that just makes him a better commander, like something that he's born with or something that's been passed on to him. So that's kind of the assumption that they're making there, which is a little bit interesting. And then Gideon tells us exactly why he chased these guys all the way up to Turkey, right? Because they're my brothers, right? You killed my brothers, so now I am going to the ends of the earth to try to get rid of you, right? And that becomes his moment of revenge. So he tries to get his son to come and kill them, but his son won't do it. So then he has to kill them. So that's kind of the revenge tour that we see here. He completes his victory, and then we move on to the moment where they ask Gideon to rule over him. So I'll read a couple of these. This is the back end of chapter 8. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." And Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Oh, Gideon. What a nice, beautiful sentiment, dude. Oh, how faithful are we? Right? Next thing he asks for the spoils of war. If there is no king, right, those spoils of war that, you have won in battle, you can take home and feed your family, right? In a time where like the next crop harvest could wipe your entire bloodline out, to have like those pieces of gold that are very valuable that could perhaps buy you some food or some supplies to get you through a famine are incredibly valuable. They're not going to give these earrings to anybody. If Gideon is not their king, they're not going to give him the earrings and all of the gold and all of the spoil. And yet the first thing that he does after not being king is ask for a king's measure of spoil. So, okay, I don't really know what's going on there, bud, right? Let me make a request of you. Everyone give me the earrings from his spoil, for they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, "We will willingly give them," right? "Well, you're not our king, but we'll definitely give you a king's spoil." Right? And they spread a cloak, and every man threw his earrings in the spoil. All right. These guys obviously think, or are at least treating Gideon like a king. If he's not a king in name, he is being a king in action, at least starting here. And then he does something very interesting with this. So we need to split this apart a little bit. The weight of the golden earrings he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, which I assume is very heavy. We don't have to get into that. Besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were around the necks of their camels. And Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city. Okay. Who wears ephods?
Priest.
Priests. So what's Gideon saying about himself and his family?
Wow.
I am your priest as well.
So he's a priest and a king. Is he also a
Prophet?
Is
Is he comparing himself to God? then?
Making himself a right.
A little bit. So there's a couple things going on here. And again, I'll give Gideon, we'll say something nice about what's going on here with Gideon, and then we'll condemn him because the Bible condemns him. An ephod is like, it's not quite a cloak. It's more like a vest, right? And it like, I don't know. I could look it up, but, yeah. And so like the high priest's ephod when it's described in Exodus and I think in Deuteronomy too, It's got like 12 plates of precious stones on the front. So it's kind of like this apron or this vest or whatever. And it's very intricately woven. And so the gold is probably and we'll get to what he's doing here. He probably has 12 plates of gold on the front of his ephod. So it's like some linen thing that he would wear, and that would be it would be plated in gold. The high priest's ephod had these 12 precious stones on it, and it had like the names of all the tribes. It had a turban with the names of the tribes, I think, too. But then even when you get into 1 Samuel, the beginning of Samuel, it says that Hannah weaves or like makes Samuel a linen ephod, right? But that's because Samuel's going to go be a helper at the tabernacle, right? He's going to go be an assistant of the priest. And it's not an ephod that has like all of the priestly garments on it, but it's got the apron of the worker in the tabernacle. So this ephod that Gideon has set up that has all of this gold on it is telling us that Gideon is viewing himself, or perhaps to give him a little benefit of the doubt, or Gideon is, I might say, trying to recover the priesthood in a way. If you have been reading along with us in Judges, the priesthood has not been mentioned. There have been zero mentions of the priests and what they are doing in Israel, right? These are the guys who are in charge of the tabernacle, which is the tent where God dwells, in charge of the Ark of the Covenant, where for the time being it is considered the seat of God, the place where you can go find him. And these guys, the priests, are absent, right? They are nowhere to be found in the midst of all this. As they are watching Israel's spiritual decline, the priests are saying and doing nothing. Right, Debbie?
Now that was the priests were the family of Levi, right?
Yep.
So was Gideon a Levite?
No, Gideon's from Manasseh.
Okay.
Right.
So he was making assumptions that.
Yeah, he's making a lot of assumptions, right? So there's a lot of ways that he's going wrong. He's not in the family of the priests. He's not taking care of the tabernacle. He is not assigned, or his vocation is not to do any sort of priestly tasks. And yet, again, maybe I'll just be a little bit of a Gideon apologist for a second. I think, and I can speculate, that what Gideon is seeing is the lack of priestly leadership in Israel, and has thought to himself, without consulting God, I think I need to do something about this. Right? I think that if we're going to make Israel great again, then I better figure something out here, right? Like that's seems to be in the best way. That seems to be Gideon's motivation here, right? Obviously, this is not the correct thing to do, right? The task of those wearing the ephod is not Gideon's task,
It's the same thing
Saul did.
Saul did.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, he
He
didn't wait for.
assumes the office of priest and offers a sacrifice
right.
under some kind of flimsy excuse like
You know,
Well,
he
there
was
you were
delayed,
late.
Yeah,
there
You
was
were-
nobody else here to do it.
Right. So this is what's happening in Gideon, right? And again, like Saul does this too, right? Gideon has kind of taken it upon himself to be the leader of Israel, right? Or to be the king and the priest of Israel. So this is a huge issue. And so then, kind of as John said, this becomes an idol, because now it's not necessarily something like they worship the ephod, but it's an idol in the sense that it is pulling Israel's worship away from the place where God is to be worshiped, right? That it becomes a distraction or a temptation away from where God promises to be, right? In that sense, it becomes idolatry. So that is that. And then any other comments or questions on the ephod? And then we'll get into my little favorite one, because I took 2 whole years of Hebrew, and so I can parse this apart, and I'll teach you, because I am obviously very smart and very good at it. So then Gideon goes on in verse 30. He has 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. If you could guess, in this day and age, what kind of person has a bunch of wives? A king has a bunch of wives, right? For the ruling class of a nation in this day and age, the primary way you forge alliances is not just writing a treaty, but actually getting married to a relative of the person that you are trying to forge an alliance to. So, like, to have many wives and many concubines is a political statement that you are allied with the people from where these women come. So Gideon is forging foreign alliances, right? If Gideon is not the king of Israel, why is he forging foreign alliances? What does that even mean, dude? Right? So we got that. And then my favorite one, he has a son with a concubine in Shechem, and he called his name, and if you have your study Bibles, you already know what this means.
Abimelech.
Abimelech. Ab means father. That I in there is a personal marker. It's a my. And Melech. Anyone want to guess what this means?
King.
King.
My father is the king.
He named his son, My Father is the King. I'm not your king. Yahweh's your king. Right? What's your son's name? My father's the king. Right? That's what we have in Gideon. This is how we're ending. Right? So again, the point being, as we're going through the Judges cycle, the point of this whole narrative, or at least one of the points of this whole narrative, is we are just watching Israel just kind of like slowly go down and like decline and decline and decline in morality, right? Like watching something in the toilet flush and just spin and spin and spin down the vortex, right? That these heroes of Israel are slowly becoming less and less
Heroic.
right? And again, and just kind of to prep you, Samson is the last big judge. And then after that, we have all of this narrative about how there's like nothing redeemable in Israel, and there aren't even any judges to come and save. Right? That's where we're headed. Right? That the judges have fallen so far flat that these guys can't be relied on to come and save Israel from its enemies either. So again, as we're going through Gideon, as we're kind of wrapping up here with Gideon. Right. Did he bring about God's salvation for the good of his people? Yes, obviously. The land had great rest from its enemies and had at least some semblance of true and proper faith, perhaps, of Israel, of Yahweh in this for 40 years as Gideon was alive. That is not going to stop it from continuing its moral decline. Right, Debbie?
So if there really wasn't any priestly work being done at the time, was there any prophets? Were there any prophets
So there
at
are
that time?
there are some.
I mean, it's not a Samuel or a.
Right. There aren't any identified there aren't a ton identified by name. At the beginning of chapter 6, a prophet comes to Israel and proclaims, but I don't think that prophet has a name, or do they?
It seemed like they sometimes got Israel back on course.
Yeah, so the prophets take a larger role when the kingship is established. I guess I could put it that way.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, this is the end of Gideon. He makes it into Hebrews 11, the Faith Hall of Fame. He is commended for his great victory that he won against God's enemies. He's not that great of a guy. But that's also kind of the point. So Karen.
Verse 33 on it then says, after he died, they all went back to worshiping Baal. Were they not worshiping Baal when Gideon was alive?
So maybe not. Probably not, right? I think that if Gideon is the king, but really not king of Israel, and his whole reputation is centered on him tearing apart an altar of Baal and then winning a great victory against Baal worshipers, then he is going to have enough influence to deny that practice and enough reputation to deny that practice.
Was he,
So
when John had said something like your ephod of gold statement, was he wanting the people to worship him then?
no, so well, he is wanting the people to worship Yahweh, to worship God, but they are worshiping in the wrong way. Or
it's also a case of, yeah, worship Yahweh, but don't forget about me.
right. So yeah, so that would be part of it too. In the sense that, man, if I put this together today, I don't think I would go with any denomination for stuff. I would probably think about like, maybe it's a little bit closer to the people who say that they're like spiritual or not and not religious, or the ones that say that they like worship or chase after truth as hard as they can, right? Like, oh, I worship God, but really what I crave is the truth. And so then like that becomes kind of a distraction, or becomes if that is what you're chasing after, then that's kind of a first commandment violation, right? That if God is the one that we are to hold fast to, and you say, well, like, well, I actually know that there are other sources of truth out there, so I'm really just somebody who's chasing after truth, right? Well, then that idea of truth then becomes your God, and you're distracted by it. So I like that would probably be, at least off the top of my head, that for me would be closer with what Gideon's getting at.
And most likely in the houses, Baal still in the back shelf. It just
Right, yeah.
collecting dust.
Right.
It's still there.
Right.
You
Yeah.
don't throw them away.
He's still around. And again, like pagans can just add infinity gods, right?
Well, that's right.
So like the people who worshipped Baal were also probably worshiping Yahweh, right? The Canaanites probably worshipped God, but they just kind of like added him into their like 100 gods. And God's saying like, no, you're not going to put me in a milieu of like rocks and stone and sticks. Right? You are going to worship me alone. And so then that becomes the temptation for Israel, right? Because they meet these Canaanites, and the Canaanites are like, hey, what God do you worship? And they're like, oh, we worship Yahweh, the God of heaven. And they're like, oh my gosh, we're so interested. Can we worship him too? And we'd be like, yeah, totally. Yeah, let's all go worship him together. And then they're like, well, we only worship Yahweh. And they're like, oh, well, we worship Yahweh with you, and that's so cool, but we worship Baal too. There's going to be a temptation there for you to be like, oh, I wonder if you are just so interested about Yahweh, then I wonder what this Baal guy's got too. Right? Like that's going to be part of it too. So,
Which is why we have close communion.
indirectly, yes. So I would say indirectly that kind of thought and sentiment would be parallel to that. So, yeah. All right. Next week we'll have you read chapter 9. That is Abimelech. My father is not king, but Abimelech is going to try to set himself up as king, and that won't go well for him. So let's pray, and we will get out of here. Heavenly Father, I thank you for today, for everything you have given us. I thank you for our salvation that you have won outside of our own efforts and our own tryings. Watch over us as you watched over Israel in the days of Gideon. Save us from our enemies that we cannot save ourselves from, and bring us into your blessed faith and blessed worship. Be with us always, and may we have a great week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, friends, I will see you next week.